All right, we're recording. Hi everyone, I'm Dan C. This is the Knowledge is Money channel, and today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite topics in personal finance, investing, and just decision making in general. It's a topic that's helped me throughout my career, just learn and grow, not only as it relates to my own financial decisions, but just how I make decisions in my everyday life and grow relationships with people, whether it be my family, my friends, my coworkers. It's helped me tremendously, and it's really interesting. So the topic we're going to be talking about today is behavioral finance. It's a topic that you probably have heard about before, but may not know too much about it. So we're going to go do a deep dive on it, and it's a topic that really has become really much more popular in the last certainly decade, but even in the last couple of years. And if you think about everything we try to kind of promote here at the Knowledge is Money channel, it's really just that, logical, rational decision making. How can you make better decisions with information? The more information you have, the more you know about yourself and how you're wired, the more likely you are to make better decisions that will then multiply into have positive effects for your wealth, but also just your well-being. So I think behavioral finance is a really, really great way to do that. And for me personally, it's been one of the most fascinating topics, most interesting, and I think where I've learned the most in terms of how I think about, like I said, not only just general investing, but just how the world works and how people kind of interact with each other and why we do the things that we do. So, before we get started, I should say that I recorded this whole video yesterday, and it didn't stick. So this is part 2. So hopefully you get to, hopefully I'm better, Hopefully I'm better. But yeah, I recorded the whole video, and then I went to hit save, and my audio was there, but the video wasn't there. So I guess I'm learning how to do this still. But my point in telling you is that I went through it. It was really enjoyable to talk about behavioral finance yesterday when no one saw it. Hopefully people see this version. But one of the stories that, I like to tell when I first talk about behavioral finance is, when I was younger in college and just thinking about like how things happen in the world, right? I remember I was sitting around with some friends and just saw the worst movie that I've ever seen. Just horrible. Just like one of the the plot was ridiculous. Now they kind of make like these silly, like they're horrible movies to on purpose, like Sharknado and all that, whatever, those type of movies. But this was before there was any irony. It was just like trying to be a good movie, and it was like on that level bad. And apologies for any Sharknado fans who like really take that movie seriously. If you really like it, I apologize. Don't come after me in the comments. But I was sitting around thinking with my friends, like, how do these movies, like, there's money that goes into movies. People need to be hired as actors. There's directors. There's scripts. There's I'm sure, I imagined people sitting around a boardroom saying, oh yes, this horrible idea that clearly is such a horrendous movie. Yes, this is good. This is what I'm going to put my career behind and my stamp of approval. And of course, you get older, decision making isn't that linear, right? There was a lot of little decisions that went up into that moment when the movie was actually made. I'm sure when the movie was being made, there was even more decisions, and like just how these decisions kind of add up into either good outcomes or bad outcomes over time. Really, to me, in a nutshell, is kind of what behavioral finance, behavioral economics tries to explore. It's how we make decisions, and then ultimately, like, how if you're not aware of some of your own biases and kind of flawed thinking, it can lead you, if information is presented to you in a certain way, you could seek out information that you want to confirm your own kind of thesis. It can lead to bad outcomes. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of share that aside. It just brought me back to, I used to love watching bad movies. Mystery Science Theater 3000, shout out to that when I was younger, just watching them just rip apart bad movies. Like, what were they thinking? And like, obviously not that easy to make a movie, so it's easy to sit back, I guess, and critique, but sometimes it's also funny. So Mystery Science Theater 3000 was great, the original ones. So that's an aside, but like I said, today we are going to be talking about behavioral finance. It's a fascinating field, and it studies how people make financial decisions. And the subject is essential to understanding why people sometimes make irrational choices, and how you can avoid, and you learn about it, how you avoid making those same mistakes. It's been around for decades, behavioral finance has, but it's gained significant attention in recent years. And I think this is because investors have really recognized that traditional finance theories, which assume that people are rational and always make logical decisions, they don't always hold true. So let's get into it. And what I'm going to do. There are 5. Well, actually, first, there's behavioral finance. There's some terminology, right? So there's behavioral finance and behavioral economics. So behavioral finance tries to explain why people often kind of fail to optimize their financial decisions, right? So, for example, investigates why investors often sell their stocks during a market crash or buy when the market is soaring, which are, history says, two of the worst times to buy and or sell. And it also studies why people often hold on to their losing stocks for too long, hoping that they will recover. Behavioral economics, on the other hand, just like slight nuance, field of study that combines insights from psychology and economics to get a broader understanding of how people make decisions generally that affect overall, economic output. So it's not just thinking about investing in stocks and bonds and other asset classes, is really much more broader. But the concepts and the theories and the output of both fields of research are very, very similar. The applications are just a little different. I'm going to be referring to it as behavioral finance, but if you hear me slip up and refer to it as behavioral economics, really the two terms are used interchangeably. Like I said, there's 5 main principles that will, I think, help you get a good understanding of what behavioral finance is, and we're gonna get into those, and then after that, we're gonna show you how you can kind of use those principles, and once you understand them, here's some applications, how you can use them in your everyday lives, in your portfolio construction, and your just general personal finance decision making process as well. So we'll give you some kind of real life applications. So be sure to stick around to the end. And then we're going to do a deep dive on one of my favorite books on the topic, which is it's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and it will do. He really does a really good job of bringing the ideas of behavioral finance to life. When he's one of the pioneers, he did all the studies. He came up with the concept. He's one of the founding fathers of behavioral finance and behavioral economics. So he's a very trusted source in the field of study. So we'll do a deep dive in that book. It's in, I think, 5 sections. So we'll go through an overview of the whole book, and then it's each section with the idea of giving you guys a video that you guys and girls, sorry, can. I'm from New Jersey. You guys, it slips sometimes. That everyone can kind of just dive into and just do the part that they want to focus on, right? So just bite-sized content. Stay tuned. We're going to jump into the 5 main principles of behavioral finance coming up next. All right, the 5 main principles of behavioral finance. We're going to get into a little bit of each, and then I will give you, like I said, an application of how to use them. The first one is called loss aversion. So loss aversion is the tendency to feel the pain of loss more acutely than the pleasure of gain. And this can lead people to make irrational decisions, such as holding on to losing investments for too long or selling winning investments too quickly. I think we touched on that earlier. And to avoid this, it's important to focus on the long-term goals of your investment strategy and not letting short-term fluctuations in the market affect your decisions. And just a little bit more about loss aversion before we get into principle number 2. So, they did a lot of studies, and the idea of, would you rather lose $1 or gain $1? And when you take something away from people, it has more of an impact. So people are much more likely to say they do not want to lose $1, right? So that goes the same for when you make money in an investment. You start to see it go down, even though your long-term thesis go down in the short term, even though your long-term thesis is that it's going to rise over the long term. People see that short-term dip and they react, and they pull their money out when really their plan is to hold something for 5-10 years, and instead they react to that short-term drop, and they take their short-term games. You want to talk about people did that, and I'm not promoting crypto here, but think about people who bought Bitcoin or any kind of cryptocurrency in the early days, and they saw their initial, I don't know, whatever it was they put in, like a couple $100, and Bitcoin went from, I don't know, 10 to 50, and they were like, oh my God, like, right, and they had a long-term thesis maybe, or maybe they didn't, but the idea is that they saw it go down maybe to 30, and they were still up, but they were like, oh my God, I could lose it all. So they took out all their money, and had they kept it in, it would have turned out obviously a lot better for them. And people do that with stocks and more rational investments than cryptocurrency as well. But just think of all the people who are out there, and that happened too. So principle number 2 is called anchoring. And anchoring is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when we're making decisions. And this is another one I talked earlier about behavioral finance being much more than just how you make investment decisions and personal finance decisions. People do this all the time when they meet someone for the first time. There's someone could be having a horrible day. They could be having the best day of their life. And yet you use that first interaction with them, that first 15 to 20 seconds to kind of make a determination on who that person is. And you anchor your perception of that person to that first 20 seconds. And obviously, in that 20 seconds, that's not representative of who the person is as a whole. It could have a lot of factors on, what's going on in their day. Did they get enough sleep? Are they hungry? They could be having a really hard time at home. Something could have happened at work, and yada yada yada. You go on and on. But this idea of anchoring is that you get locked into one piece of information. It's the first piece of information and you use it. You overweight it in terms of its importance in making a decision. And if you see a stock price drop sharply, you may anchor on that price and assume that it's now undervalued, even if there's no kind of new fundamental reason for the drop, right? To avoid anchoring bias, it's really important to gather and analyze all available information before making any type of investment decision. And again, that'll be repeated throughout here. So that's anchoring. The next one is called confirmation bias. That's principle number 3 of behavioral finance. So confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. And this can lead to overconfidence in our investment decisions and prevent us from considering alternative viewpoints. And for this one really resonated with me. Anyone who kind of has done any kind of research or had to write a paper for school, you think you set out sometimes with a thesis instead of letting the research lead you to a conclusion or lead you to a thesis, and you say, I have an idea and it's a really good idea. If only I had some facts to support it, right? And instead of just going out and looking for the facts that maybe don't support it or make you think differently and would cause you to change your idea, you seek out the facts that confirm your idea, right? I have a really great idea. Oh, well, this person agrees with me, and this snippet over here, this snippet of data, if I cut it this way, this supports my thesis. And that's confirmation bias. And I think it happens all the time. It happens, more so like when people have think about when you're arguing with someone, right? And they just hear kind of what they want to hear, right? That's like classic confirmation bias. They just go, they draw on, or they take things that are out of context that help support their argument, right? I think it happens, it happens a lot, right? So confirmation bias, one of the real things to kind of look out for, and I think in this environment too, where you just have people talk about digital echo chambers, right? Where you're surrounding yourself with people who, think like you and have the same kind of point of view. So this in this world, I think it's actually easier to get different points of view in some ways, but you have to force yourself to do it. And if you're aware that there is such a thing as confirmation bias, that's the first step. Again, if you're aware that it exists, you can see when you're doing it, and you can go and you can seek remedies to it, and seek out different points of view. And you think about the CEO of a company, they're like, how my gosh, like how did they let that company go under? And maybe the CEO was surrounded by yes men and yes women, right? Like, oh yeah, boss, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, it's a great idea. And like no one tells them the truth about what could go wrong, because it's it wouldn't be good for their career, right? So they kind of just go along with it. But if you're running a company, if you're running your own personal finances, and you just seek out people who agree with you, that is, you better be right all of the time. And it's also gonna force you to not think holistically about your idea. Anyone who's confirmation bias, you think about anyone who's written a paper, and you go and you proofread the paper and you swear everything's great, and then someone else reads it and like, oh, you're missing a comma here, there's a typo here, you said this word is spelled incorrectly. You just can't see because you're too close to it. And the same thing happens with your ideas. You're too close to your ideas, you're too invested in your ideas is your own, and once you form it, you need to go out there and get different opinions on it. And confirmation bias is it just is the description of that kind of phenomenon. And again, when you're aware of it, you could put processes in place to stop it from making your decisions worse than they need to be. And like I said, it's also, this isn't just, confirmation bias is not just prevalent in the financial world. It's influenced by social, cultural factors, how you were raised, what you've been exposed to, what you learned in school, what type of school you went to. And like I said, people often are surrounded by others who share their beliefs and values, which can create this bubble of confirmation bias, that echo chamber I was referring to before. And they're exposed to a limited range of perspectives. Media outlets and political groups can use confirmation bias to their advantage by presenting information in a way that supports their agenda and discourages critical thinking. So unfortunately, that method is very, very widespread in propaganda, right? You got to think, okay, there's just one way to think, and I have one slogan, and I'm only going to present the information in a way that promotes that slogan. That's a manipulative way to use to tap into people's confirmation bias, right? And I think there are several ways, which we'll get into a little later too, to mitigate the effects of confirmation bias. But I mean, really, the best way is to surround yourself with people who, I think this is important, who know the subject matter that you're talking about, right? Like, you want them to have some kind of level of expertise. So you don't just need to take a random person's advice, right? So who is kind of on your level in terms of what it is you're making a decision about, and what the field that your idea is in, but may not think of you, may not think like you, or just has a different point of view, or has the ability to think critically, right? Like maybe they agree with your idea in theory, but they poke a few holes in it, and then it'll just make your idea stronger, right? So it's just that idea of getting the right people to weigh in on your idea, and having that network of people who you trust to tell you the truth, and not just trust to tell you what you want to hear, right? I think that's really important. So they have to be smart, capable people who you trust, but not smart, capable people who have their own self-interest in mind, and for some reason telling you yes is going to help them. If you're running a business or something like that, just keep that in mind, that you need to promote an environment where it's open. There's open dialogue. It's you can express different points of view without any kind of fear of retribution, like disagreeing with the boss. You disagree with the boss, you're fired. That's in my mind, that's not a good working environment. And that may work in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to blow yourself up. So that's number 3 on our list of the 5 principles of behavioral finance, confirmation bias. Number 4 on our list is herding behavior. So herding behavior is the tendency to follow the crowd and make decisions based on what others are doing rather than your own independent analysis. And this can lead to bubbles and market crashes as investors all over the world, rush to do the same thing, buy or sell at the same time. You think of the dot-com bubble back in the 2000s. You think about the recent tech bubble that we've had going on in the market over the last couple of years. And I like to use the example, I Googled it the other day. So this idea that behavioral finance is like a new thing that, is just because of we have these, these fast moving capital markets and that behavioral finance is like relatively new. No. The concepts and ideas are hardwired of behavioral finance, behavioral economics, are hardwired into us. They've been around for centuries. So there's this thing called the tulip mania back in the 1600s. When the price of tulips, I think it was in the Netherlands, but don't quote me on that. It's not important about where it was. It's just the time period and what happened. The price of tulips went up. Everyone started buying tulips. Everyone was like, "Oh my God!" It was like the crypto of the day. People bought tulips, and of course, the prices of tulips eventually came down. And there's some famous people during the time who lost all their life savings, and they piled all their money into tulips. As ridiculous as it sounds, a couple centuries from now, people are like, these people piled all their money into this this fake money called crypto. Crypto's real money. We're not going to get into a crypto debate here, but the point is, when a lot of people are doing the same thing, and your only reason for doing it is because everyone else is doing it, that's probably not a good reason. Maybe it is. But do your own research first before you pile in, do what everyone else is doing just for the sake of doing it. Anyone maybe growing up when I did, parents would say, if everyone else was going to jump off a bridge, would you do it? No, I wouldn't. I remember I said to my parents, well, no, of course not. Not unless they had a good reason for jumping off the bridge. I don't know, maybe the bridge wasn't that high, and it was a hot day. They wanted to swim. But if everyone was jumping off a high bridge, would I just blindly jump off the bridge? I used to say to them, no, I wouldn't. I guess I've been a behavioral economist at heart my whole life, and they didn't know how to, really respond to that answer. But the point is, a lot of people were just like, well, I guess I just was doing it because all my friends were doing it. That always seemed ridiculous to me, just to do something because someone else was doing it. But I think I'm probably in the minority there. Anyway, that's herding behavior. Don't go with the herd just for the sake of going with the herd. And I think an important part here, the herd isn't always wrong, right? That's not the point of herding behavior. It's just, the point is, sometimes people are right. Like a lot of people happen to be right about one thing that you may agree with, but the point is you don't just do it because everyone else is doing it. You do it because it makes sense, and if other people happen to do it, that's fine. But if enough other people start to do it and it changes your thesis on something, then that's something you should look into too. But herding behavior is you don't just do something just for the sake of doing it because others are doing it and getting rich off of what looks to be an easy thing without really understanding what it is you're investing in. So principle number 5 is something called framing. And framing, this is really interesting. This is the way that information is presented and can influence our decisions. So, for example, if you say to someone an investment has a 10% chance of failure, we may be more likely to avoid it. But if you present that very same investment as it has a 90% chance of success, people are more likely to do it. Right? So I think it's really, framing is the idea is really, really important when you're communicating too. If you want to get an honest answer for someone, try to present the information in a way that isn't going to kind of trigger their biases, and present it in a clear way that doesn't try to influence them by using this kind of framing behavior, right? But that's when you're doing your own research on ideas, look at how information is presented and again, it's all about identifying these biases, and once you identify them, once you know they exist, you can become aware of ways to avoid the pitfalls that come with kind of incorporating these biases into your research and into your decision making when it comes to personal finance. So those are the five main principles. And I think we'll take a break here, and then in the next section, I'm going to give you kind of a deep dive about how you can apply some of these principles, and then we're going to do a really fun exercise. One of my favorite examples, real time example of a behavioral finance study from a few decades ago, where people were convinced they had the right answer, even when I told them the right answer. I've done this in groups before, so stay tuned for that. This is Knowledge is Money, and we'll be right back. Okay, so how can you apply the five main principles of behavioral finance to your everyday decision making and personal finance decisions? So let's get into it. So just to recap, so the five main principles of behavioral finance, and important to point out here, these aren't the only ones. These are just the foundational ones that I think will give you a really good understanding, a good place to start to kind of understand behavioral finance from just a one-on-one level, and then you can kind of dive into each. They'll take you into other concepts of behavioral finance. But the five that I'm kind of pointing out here: number one, loss aversion. So people are more opposed to losing money than they are to gaining it, or I guess happy about gaining it. Number two is anchoring. So the idea that we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when we're making decisions. And then the idea of confirmation bias, right? So we seek out evidence, we seek out things that support our thesis, and kind of block out things that maybe don't. Number four, herding behavior. So doing something just because everyone else is doing it. The idea of if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge too? And then principle number five is framing. So how information is presented. If you present it as there's a chance you could lose money, but the same percentages are there. That is called framing. All right, so now let's go a little deeper into how you could identify these when they happen in your everyday life and decision making, and then like some mechanisms in place to stop them, right? So I think the first part is, if you understand them, that's more than half the battle, right? Because once you understand them, you'll be able to recognize them in your own decision making, and naturally will just kind of filter out of your process. But let's go. All right, so loss aversion. So to avoid the pain of losing money, a person may be tempted to hold on to a losing investment for too long, hoping that it will eventually recover. To overcome this bias, a person can set clear stop-loss orders or price targets before investing and stick to them even if the investment starts to decline. And this can help ensure that losses are limited and that the person is not holding on to a losing investment for too long. And I think this really underscores the importance. One of the main ways to fight the biases identified by behavioral finance is to have a plan. If you have a plan, that's not a day-to-day plan, it's a long-term plan. It's backed up by real research, your goals. If you have a plan, you can use that plan as a way to kind of safeguard yourself from some of the traps of behavioral finance, right? And I think this one is really good, right? You set a stop-loss order. Yep, I'm comfortable. I'm going to set out the stocks at X price. I'm comfortable if it falls to Y price. I'm not comfortable if it falls below that price. You can set that up automatically, and then you don't even have to look at it. It just takes care of it for you. Or if you want to buy a stock and you want it at a certain price, you set a price target. You're like, I'm comfortable buying it at X. It's trading at Y now. I want to buy it at X. You can set that up. So I think that is a really good way to kind of use automated processes that are part of a longer plan, to a longer term plan, to kind of overcome this first bias of loss aversion in behavioral finance. All right, so number two, anchoring. When shopping for a new product, a person may be tempted to buy the first one they see that's priced the lowest, even if it may not be the best value or quality. And to avoid anchoring bias, a person can research multiple products and compare their features and prices before making a decision. And this can help ensure that the person is making an informed decision based on objective analysis rather than relying on the first piece of information they receive, right? And I think, this is a really good lesson in your everyday life. Again, that idea that behavioral finance is not just about personal finance and investing. It's about much more than that. there's examples of behavioral finance in our everyday lives, and shopping is a really good one, right? There's a lot of biases that come to play. Marketing agencies and brands definitely tap into people's hardwired emotions to try to get them to sell them things that they often don't need. And when you're doing research now on a product, there's never been a better time to be a consumer in terms of the research available to you for a product. You know why you need it. If you have a need, you can go out and, there's a product that fits that need exactly. You can see how other people have used it based on your peer reviews. There's just tons of information. There's blogs that review products in detail. So again, if you take the time, it may seem like a small thing, but you won't end up, if you do this, you won't end up with a house of junk that you don't need, that doesn't work or fit the problem that you set out to solve. So that's one way you can kind of overcome anchoring in your everyday life. Confirmation bias. We talked a little bit about the solution here, but when evaluating an investment, a person may be tempted to only seek out information that confirms, like we said, their pre-existing beliefs or biases rather than considering all available information. We talked about, avoiding confirmation bias by seeking out all information that, could support your thesis or could not support your thesis. And that's only, if you do that, it's only going to make your thesis stronger and your thinking and your thought process stronger, right? And it requires intellectual honesty. It requires you to be a little vulnerable too. No one wants to think that their idea is wrong, but when you view it as part of the process, right? Part of the process of coming up with a better idea is along the way. Our idea starts out here, and it's only going to get better over time. It's still your idea. You're just building on it with the help of others and your own critical thinking process over time. One thing I'll say here, I think we get into this a little later, but it's important. Sometimes people overcorrect for this, and the term is called, I think, paralysis by analysis. And they take in too much information and it becomes noise. And I hinted at this before, but the idea of you don't want to just if you're building a car and you have an engineering degree and you know how to build a car and you have a very specific question. I have no idea how to build a car. I don't know, carburetor, I don't even know what that is. But you have a very specific question about the carburetor, and you go to a baker and you're like, hey, Bob the baker, what do you think of this carburetor? And you get Bob the baker's opinion on it. Well, that's not really going to help you. So I think it's important to know the source of information that you kind of let into your circle, and that in itself is filled with biases. So how do you even source the information in this world to invite new and diverse perspectives? So definitely this one takes time and energy to do, I think, correctly and effectively. But if you do it, if you take the time to do it, it should expand your network of people who you trust and who are kind of your people that you can go to for just to build your knowledge on things, which is in itself valuable. But the dividends I think will pay off in terms of your decision making. If you do this repeatedly, you really develop the muscle to think critically, which I think is a really important skill. All right, so that's confirmation bias. That's some practical, real world tips for how you can kind of beat it. Next up, herding behavior. So when investing, a person may be tempted to follow the crowd and buy or sell based on the actions of others rather than based on their own analysis of the strategy, right? And so to avoid herding behavior, a person can stick to their investment strategy and goals and avoid making impulsive decisions based on short-term market fluctuations and what other people are doing. So again, having a plan, sticking to it long-term, I think this is another really good effective way to avoid herding behavior, which is one of the key principles of behavioral finance. So have a plan, stick to it, put processes in place that help you stick to the plan, that take emotion out of investing. And then last but not least, framing. So when evaluating an investment opportunity, a person may be influenced by how the information is presented, such as the risk or the potential return. So to avoid framing bias, a person can gather all available information and analyze it objectively rather than relying on how the information is presented. And this can help ensure that the person is making a decision based on the underlying fundamentals of the investment rather than the way the information is framed. And by incorporating these principles into your everyday lives, you can improve your decision-making skills and make more rational and informed decisions. And like I said, it may take some practice and effort, but over time, it can really lead to better financial outcomes and greater successes in helping you achieve your goals. And to summarize, behavioral economics or behavioral finance can provide valuable insights into how people make decisions and how these decisions can be influenced by psychological factors. By applying these principles to personal finance decisions and investing, you can avoid common biases and make more rational and informed decisions. And that, to me, like I hear that, my heart sings, right? That is why behavioral finance is so important to what we're trying to do at the Knowledge is Money channel. That, in a nutshell, really, it's what we're doing, right? We're giving you more information, giving you more expertise and education so you can make better decisions. And that's exactly what behavioral finance helps you do. It's a really great foundational topic. So I think, this one, if you're going to start anywhere, start with behavioral finance, get a better understanding, and I think it'll really, really, really help you if you start with behavioral finance. So that's the practical application part of it. So we're going to do the book. We're going to summarize the thinking, fast and slow. But before we do, I want to go and give one of my favorite examples that when you present it live, I don't know, it's going to be different over video. Obviously, there's not a room full of people who can yell at me and tell me I'm wrong. People go nuts. And they are convinced that they're right, even though they're actually wrong. So I'm going to walk you through that example, give you the opportunity to actually answer it, see if you can get it correct, show you the right answer, and why. So stick around for that. That's coming up next. All right, so we're going to get into a very specific example, one of my favorite examples of behavioral finance. But before we do, I just went out to get a glass of water, and my daughter, my 9-year-old, she just reminded me, she just did something that reminded me of some of the things we've been talking about in behavioral finance. So she said, "Dad, spell yes for me." Y-E, yes. So I did. Okay. And I said, "What does that spell?" And I said, "Yes." And then she said, spell, what does E-Y-E-S spell? I had to think about it, and most people say, E-S, 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 and of course it's eyes, right? So that's an example of framing, how you present information. You anchor someone to one thing, and then it trips your brain out. So I thought that literally just happened, so I had to share it with everyone. Okay, so this is a famous study conducted by, I think, Daniel Kahneman. It had been Daniel Kahneman or maybe one of his peers early on in behavioral finance. And it's building off of the idea of framing, but it's something called conjunction fallacy, right? And I've done this in groups with live people. I've done this in presentations, and it always gets a very big response. And even after, like I said, I walk people through why the answer is right. The right answer is correct, and the reasoning behind it. Remind people that this is based on statistics. It's not black and white. There's no gray. There's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. People are still convinced that the wrong answer is the right answer. So that's the background here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the whole setup. I'm going to show you kind of okay, here's the information, and then you're going to have to say which of two scenarios are more likely. All right, so it's based on statistical probability, which is a field of, I think, mathematical study. But the point is, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer based on statistics. Okay, and then I'll give you some time. We'll do like the Jeopardy music. Don't Google it, and you can think which one is right and which one is wrong. Okay. So here we go. All right. So like I said, going to give you some information about a person, a hypothetical person, and then ask you which can present you with two scenarios and then ask you to decide which one is more probable. Okay? So the person, her name is Linda. Linda is 31 years old. She's single. She's outspoken. She's very bright. She majored in philosophy. And as a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice. And she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Okay? So, say that one more time. All right? This is our hypothetical character. Take all that information in, and then I'm going to give you a scenario about what is more probable about this person, this hypothetical person, Linda. Okay? So again, Linda, 31 years old. She's single. She's outspoken. And she's very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Okay? So that's Linda. Okay? All right. Now, here's the fun part. Which of these two scenarios is more probable about Linda, our friend Linda? Okay? Based on the information that I gave to you. So, scenario number 1, Linda is a bank teller. Scenario number 2, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay? Between those two scenarios. And I'm going to give you time to think about it, but just one more time. Linda, 31 years old, single, outspoken, very bright, majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with the issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Which of those two scenarios is more probable? She's a bank teller, or she's a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. And here I'll stop. I will just stare at the camera for, we'll say, look at my watch. We'll put a timer on. Let's put a timer on. We'll put a timer on for a minute. You guys can think about it. Have a whole minute to think about it. Hang on. Don't start thinking yet. All right, 1 minute, and then you come up with your answer, and then at the end of the minute, I will tell you the right answer. And I promise you it's the right answer. Go. Drink some water while you think, but go ahead. This is definitely better with Jeopardy music. Sorry, that's probably hurting your thinking. Keep thinking. Oh, I have more coffee left. Not really. Bottom of the cup. Gross. 20 more seconds. Keep thinking. Is Linda a bank teller, or is Linda a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? What's more probable of the two, based on what you know about Linda? 10 more seconds. Keep going. Keep thinking, people. I know you can get this right. You can do it. Okay, that's the timer. Done. All right. So, the answer is, of the two, the one that is more probable is that Linda is a bank teller. Just a bank teller. And I hear people are trying to punch me through the screen. It's like the Ring. They're coming through the screen. They're, what? What do you mean? Linda is definitely a bank teller and she's active in the feminist movement. That's 100%. Everything I know on Linda is made you focus on the fact that of these things, these stereotypes that, this person would be active in the feminist movement, right? So, fine. But two things are never more probable than one, right? When they have the same thing. So she's a bank teller, full stop. That's it. That's more probable than her being a bank teller and anything else, okay? Because it's just one thing. So that's an idea of, and before I get into it, but that you can see how we frame the information, how you are only focusing on the one part of it that is, of course, everything I know about Linda, 31 years old, single, outspoken, very bright, majored in philosophy, deeply concerned with issues of discrimination, social justice, and participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. First of all, I hope Linda, hope she does more than, just more. Bank teller could be fine, but you want to, maybe she does all that stuff. But which is more probable? Linda's a bank teller. Not that she's a bank teller in something else. So the way that you kind of think about this is, if I were to tell you, oh, and by the way, 80% of the people in the study got it wrong, just like you probably did at home. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you got it right. But 80% of people chose option 2 because they focused on the second part instead of the idea of, when you have one scenario, if you add something to it, it's less likely, right, of the two. So think about it this way, right? So the probability of 2 events occurring in conjunction is always less than or equal to the probability of either one occurring alone. And that's kind of the official definition, the official reason why Linda is a bank teller is correct. I know. All right, so now think about it this way. What's more likely? That tomorrow you will have a flat tire, okay? Or that tomorrow you will have a flat tire and that a man in a black car will stop to help you out? Well, of course, it's just that, it's just that you have a flat tire. You add that other thing into the mix, it's like who knows what's going to happen? Who's going to help you? Someone may not help you at all. But yeah, okay, I can get a flat tire, but as soon as you add another situation to that scenario, it's less likely, right? Because, again, the probability of 2 events occurring in conjunction is always less than or equal to the probability of either one occurring alone. So I think that is a really, really cool way just to kind of bring the teachings of behavioral finance to life. And like I said, people have, even after I've walked them through all of this in presentations and in meetings and everything else, they're just like, yeah, no, she's definitely Linda's in the feminist movement. So you're wrong. I don't care. So it's just a funny example. You could use it at dinner parties. So if nothing else from this video, you can walk away and say, I listened to the Knowledge is Money channel, and I've check it out, guys. I got this friend Linda. What do you think's more probable? And you can maybe get beat up at a dinner party. Who knows? Lucky you. So hopefully that was a fun way to kind of bring the teachings of behavioral finance to life. And then one more thing before we break, I want to talk about the importance of emotions, right? So like another crucial aspect of behavioral finance is the role of emotions in decision making. So emotions can play a significant role in financial decisions, often leading to irrational choices. Fear and greed, 2 powerful emotions that can lead to poor investment decisions. People are afraid. They often sell their stocks hoping to avoid further losses. This is known as panic selling. It can lead to significant losses. On the other hand, when people are greedy, they often invest in risky assets hoping to make quick profits. And this is known as speculation, and it can also lead to significant losses. So I think just that idea of, fear and greed, I think it was Warren Buffett who said, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So a little bit of herd mentality there too, and herding behavior. But just the idea of what we're doing here is, again, arming you with information so you can take emotions out of decision making and ultimately make better decisions that increase your wealth and just general well-being over time. It's exactly what we're trying to do here at Knowledge is Money. So again, think of Linda. If you take nothing away, our sweet woman Linda, she's great. She is more likely to be just a bank teller, I swear, just a bank teller. And now next up, stick around. We're going to do a deep dive into the Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Like I said, 5 chapters or 5 sections. So I'll kind of give an overview of the book. And then, he has some good examples in the book as well that kind of bring it to life. So I'll go through those and then, deep dive on each of the sections, and you can kind of pick and choose and move around as you want. But stay tuned. We'll do the deep dive on Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman coming up next. Thanks for listening so far. Hello, everyone. Hey there. So we're back at a wardrobe change, as you can see. Just making coffee to keep me stimulated, get through this, and I spilled it all over the front of my shirt. So I went back to the gray hoodie here. So here we are. Anyway, so this is kind of going to be the last segment of our video today, but we're going to do a deep dive on one of my favorite books on behavioral finance, one of my favorite books in general, definitely one of my favorite finance books, probably my favorite finance book. It's called Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist who's really revolutionized the way we think about decision making. Again, he's pioneer in behavioral economics, behavioral finance. This wasn't even a thing before Daniel Kahneman and some of his colleagues came around, started doing research, writing about it, speaking about it, and now it's really a broadly adopted field of study that a lot of big investment organizations, a lot of individual investors use to not only enhance their decision making when it comes to their finances, but also enhance their decision making in everyday life and running a business as well. So, like I said, must read for anyone interested in personal finance, as it explores the various biases and heuristics that influence our financial decisions that we've covered, obviously, previously. But you kind of got it from me, and now I'm going to summarize the knowledge from the boss here, the boss man, Daniel Kahneman. So the book, like I said before, it has 5 different parts. 5 sections. The first section is called Two Systems, and it really it's an introduction to the central thesis of the book, which is that we have 2 modes of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1, thinking fast, intuitive, and automatic. So wake up, pour some cereal in a bowl. What do I need to do next? Pour milk on it, right? You don't think about it. You think about, anytime you drive home from the train station, you drive to your kid's school, you drive to the grocery store along a route that you've taken, hundreds of times, and it just happened to me, you wake up and, it's almost like you were sleeping at the wheel and you're at the place you were like, whoa, how did that happen? It's because it's intuitive. You've done it so many times, your body just knows how to do it. And then, System 2, thinking, on the other hand, slow, deliberate, requires a lot of effort. It's the kind of thinking that we use when we solve complex problems, such as doing a math problem or writing an essay. And System 2 really requires more mental effort, like I said, but it's also more accurate and reliable, right? Because you cut out the noise, you use critical thinking, you think about it. Whereas System 1, you react based on how you're kind of wired, right? So like I said, the first section, it really dives into these 2 systems, and I think how it relates to personal finance, how it relates to just general decision making, right? Like System 1 thinking often leads us astray when it comes to money and investing decisions. We're quick to make impulsive purchases given to peer pressure, fall prey to marketing tactics. System 2, on the other hand, better suited for making smart financial decisions, allows us to weigh the pros and cons, do research, take in other points of view, and most importantly, think for the long term, right? I think System 2 is, it's a good way to think about it is System 2 is the person who saves your retirement, puts a little bit away. System 1 is like, hey man, what are you doing, System 2? Let's use that money now. Let's go to the casino, right? Let's go gamble. Let's have a fun night. Who knows if you're even going to make it to retirement, right? So I think the internal struggle, maybe it's not that I guess what's the word, pronounced in all of us, but that's hopefully a good way to think about it. So some examples of System 1 thinking, right? Spending money on things we don't need, overeating, buying new clothes when we already have plenty, eating out when you can eat in, and it might also cause us to avoid taking calculated risks like investing in the stock market because we're afraid of losing money. That might sound a little counterintuitive, but again, that it's an impulse to see money to lose money, impulsive reaction to losing that money, and again, it's short-term thinking, right? So how can we train ourselves to use more System 2 thinking when it comes to our finances? One way, create a budget. Again, plan, stick to it. There's a plan, there's a roadmap. I thought this through. I know if I have $500 to spend each month, and I'm at $450, I better not go out for that $100 dinner, right? Because it's there at $500. That's what I have to spend for the month. Another way to do it is doing research before making any big financial decisions, even making big financial purchases. I would say as well. Don't rely on your gut instinct. Take the time to gather the information and weigh your options. So I think, in this section, understanding the two systems of thinking can really help us make better financial decisions. Recognizing when we're using system one, thinking intentionally, and switching to system two, we can avoid impulsive purchases, right? So that whole idea of recognition, understanding when you're doing something that is a bias or, isn't something that's great for long-term thinking. You're just doing it based on your gut or emotion, and then switching over to system two and being like, how can I kind of course correct? And then section 2, he gets into heuristics and biases, and another essential concept of behavioral finance and in thinking fast and slow is this idea of biases, right? And mental shortcuts that people take to make decisions. Shortcuts are not always logical. Some common ones we've already covered, right? Confirmation bias, where people only look for information that supports their existing beliefs. Anchoring bias, where people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive. Overconfidence, which we'll get into later, where people overestimate their abilities. And loss aversion, which we talked about earlier as well. And what else we got here? Oh yeah, and then heuristics can also lead to poor financial decisions. So the availability heuristic is when people rely too heavily on recent or easily recalled information. So it's also called the recency bias. So if something is going up the last 2 days, it's going to continue to go up just because it's gone up recently. If something is going down the last 2 days, it's more likely to go down just because it's going down recently. And that's obviously not true. It's just you see it going down, so you just assume that it's going to continue to go down because it has in the short term. So that's section 2. I won't get too much into that because we did cover a lot of that in our kind of our overview of behavioral finance. Section 3, he goes of thinking fast and slow. He goes deeper into the concept of overconfidence and how it can lead to erroneous judgments and decisions. Argues that humans are inherently overconfident in their beliefs and their abilities, and that this bias can have serious consequences. He defines overconfidence as a tendency to believe that one's judgments and predictions are more accurate than they really are. He cites a number of studies that demonstrate this bias in a variety of contexts, from business forecasting to medical diagnosis to political predictions. He notes that even experts in their respective fields are not immune to overconfidence, and they often fail to recognize the limitations of their own knowledge. The biggest example he gives of this is the 2008 financial crisis, which he argued was caused in part by the overconfidence of investment bankers and investors and traders. Noting that many of these individuals who worked at these companies had a very good understanding of the complex financial instruments that they were dealing with, or they believed they did. And they're like, yeah, I know the risk that we're taking, totally overconfident in how credit default swaps work, and all the mortgage-backed securities and subprime stuff. They thought that they had a better handle on the risk than they actually did. That was true of risk departments and everything. And then when the crisis happened, they soon realized they were a lot riskier than they thought. And then the whole world, from a financial perspective, pretty much blew up. So it's a kind of a real life good example of the dangers of overconfidence as it can kind of play out in the real world. And then section 4 of thinking fast and slow. He discusses the concept of choices and how really dives deep into how people make decisions. Starts by discussing the impact of cognitive biases on our decision-making process. And, according to him and behavioral finance in general, these biases can cause us to make irrational choices, especially when we're under stress or time pressure. Interesting study came out in the last couple of years when judges were handing out sentences. They often, gave harsher or sentences that were out of their character later in the day, just because they were tired or overwhelmed or just kind of wanted to get through the day. They didn't realize they were doing it, obviously, but that whole idea of, am I in the right mindset, physically, emotionally, just mentally, to make a decision, or am I acting impulsively because I'm hungry or because I just want to get out of a meeting or something like that. And I think those are the little things of behavioral finance that I think is really, really cool in terms of you think about the micro decisions that you make that in isolation may not be that big of a deal, but in aggregate can lead to something, much more consequential, like, handing out a sentence, a criminal sentence that could impact someone's life, right? That may be too harsh or too lenient too. Either way. And then he brings up framing again instead of the financial example that we used before. He uses one of medical treatment. If it's framed as having a 95% success rate, people are more likely to do it. But if it's framed as having a 5% failure rate, people are less likely to do it. I know we got into that earlier, so I won't go too much further into that. And then last but not least, in the section 5 of Thinking Fast and Slow, he goes deeper into the idea of the two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. And he explains that the two selves have different priorities and needs, and they often lead to conflicting preferences and choices. And this is a really interesting and really cool way to think about it, kind of bringing the idea of system 1 and system 2 thinking, but like the two competing narratives that we have in our head, arguing that the experiencing self is focused on the present moment and the quality of the experience. It's concerned with immediate sensations like pleasure, pain, and emotions. And the remembering self, on the other hand, is focused on memories of past experiences and is concerned with the narrative of our lives. So it creates stories that make sense of our experiences, string it together in a longer narrative, and it defines who we are and our identity and how we see ourselves, right? And he explores the implications of these two selves in our decision-making process, which I just think is fascinating, right? Suggesting that the experiencing self is responsible for the majority, the majority of our choices, even though the remembering self often takes credit for them. For example, we may choose to take a job that pays less but gives us more job satisfaction because the experiencing self values the quality of the experience over the financial reward. And it also discusses how the two selves interact in decision-making. So the remembering self often distorts our memories of past experiences, which can lead to biased decision-making. We may avoid a particular vacation spot where we had a bad experience, even if the experience was an anomaly, right? Like you don't go to an entire country because you had, you got locked out of your room in a hotel one time. That is something I don't know if I've done that, but like I've come pretty close to that, right? So I think that this section to me was really, really interesting and just a brilliant way to kind of frame the competing narratives of how we have that dialogue going on in our heads. And with that is really it. That's the summary of the book. Like I said, one of the best books in behavioral finance. I think the concepts that he talks about from my perspective is really all like it's what the Knowledge is Money channel is all about, and what these videos are about: education, empowering people to make better decisions, recognizing kind of where they can fall into traps from a decision-making perspective, and arming them with the tools to course correct. And it's been great. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I appreciate all the love that you guys have been giving me, and I'm getting feedback from, like I said, people who I haven't heard from in a really long time. So it's been great to see, and we're going to continue to do it. I'm still working on some cool tools to do some more kind of visual representation in these videos, but for now you're just stuck with me, so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. Thanks as always for where knowledge is money here. All right, take care everyone.